Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. The decisions made by principals impact the lives of students and staff and aren't made lightly. Our guest this episode is Dean MacInnis, principal of Sir John Franklin High School in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. Dean talks about the unique sense of isolation faced by school principals, particularly in rural areas, and how this impacts their decision making and their mental health.
This podcast episode is brought to you by the word reflection, from the Latin meaning to bend back, as in turning thoughts back upon oneself. In the time called the Enlightenment, reflection was used as a term denoting the human ability to think about one's own thinking. John Locke distinguished between sensation, knowledge gained from external stimuli, and reflection, knowledge derived from internal mental operations. Upon reflection, that gives me a lot to think about too, now that you mention it.
Check out our website, www.restorative.ca, for some practical leadership suggestions to reduce your isolation as a school leader by using restorative questions. Now let's join your hosts, Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. I'd really like to talk about the isolation that goes with the role of a principal, or that often happens with principals.
No, for sure. Obviously, most of the administrators across the country work in rural areas. So a lot of times people envision that as you're isolated or you're alone. But at the end of the day, I'd say that's one thing, but that's very seen. You can see that. I'd say probably the biggest challenge that certainly I have learned in my position, especially even transitioning from the homeroom teacher at middle school to even being the vice principal, that's a small step. It's a big step from being the assistant principal to the principal. Because as the old saying goes, the buck stops with you. And I think, honestly, the level of responsibility that the principal has in the building it's just them. You have to be able to say to yourself, I'm making this decision for these particular reasons. They're sound, and reflecting back, because the number one reason, it's the best for kids or a kid or that kind of approach. And it's tough because if you feel you're alone because you're the only one in the building that has that job and that level of responsibility, you do sometimes psych yourself out. So you do got to talk yourself into a good headspace and be very solid, honestly, with your values and beliefs, and be good with that, because you are inundated on a daily basis with those kind of decisions. I can tell you one story that that certainly sticks out in my mind. I'm a young principal of a middle school, 6, 7, 8. I had about 325, 50 kids. And I was a part of making a decision. I literally had less than a year under my belt as a principal. I had only been the VP for 2 years prior to that. And we had a situation where a staff member was struggling personally. It was spilling over into work, but they were involved in an excursion with a group of kids to a different part of Canada. And I really was concerned about their mental health at the time. And the lingo back then wasn't about mental health. This is around 2000, early 2000-ish. And it was a situation where I sat down and I talked to a particular parent who's heavily involved in the trip. I talked to the teacher involved. I talked to the other 2 teachers who were co-involved in leading this excursion. But really, I think I made a decision that this teacher, in the best interest of kids, was not to take the trip and not to put herself in a vulnerable situation, even though they were unable to see that. That was probably that was the biggest learning curve that I'll be honest, I guarantee you, looking back, I had some sleepless nights about it, because it was a bit of a process, because it was a challenge for that staff member to accept what I was saying to them. Now, fast forward, after that, the person did come back and say, thanks for not putting me in that vulnerable situation. It just took a long time. So when you make these decisions, don't be thinking you're going to get thanked down the road, because it more than likely won't happen. In that situation, it was really tough as a new principal, literally 6 months under my belt. But I think I had done, the things like researched, spoke to the people, thought about it, wrote the pros and cons, and then at the end of the day, making a decision based on the interest of kids and aligned with my values and beliefs about how I'm going to help guide this school I didn't feel as alone, but I had district support. I had district support, certainly the superintendent and assistant superintendent at the time really, I'd say, invested in me, which helped my confidence and saying, this is your decision, Dean. We're going to back your decision. That made a huge difference. So you didn't feel as alone, although in the heat of the moment, certainly that sensation of my level of responsibility and my job weighed on me. But again, it's a learning experience too. I would never chalk it up that it was bad. I would always say I learned from it no matter what.
So
If
if you had a do-over, I was just going to ask
I
if
was
you had
gonna
a
say, I was
if you
gonna
had
say
a
the exact same thing, Sid. If
okay,
you
go
had to
ahead.
do it again,
Let's say it again together, Steve. One, two, three. No, if you had a do-over, go,
If I
Steve.
had a do-over, you know what? I probably would have had maybe some of those initial conversations earlier in the process. So because there was lots of events prior to the trip, I probably, and again, I know being experienced, I know I can pick up the signs from staff behavior, staff interactions with kids. I would have probably picked up some of those pieces of evidence earlier. So and able to have a conversation with that staff member earlier on and really being honest with them saying, hey, I've seen these kinds of things. I'm concerned. How are you doing? Not that you want to pry, but you do want to be, you want to show the human side of you. You don't want to sit there on one side of my desk and they're on the other. You want to sit side by side facing them. That kind of approach, I think I did a lot of that, not all of it. I would probably just do it earlier. And I think then guiding the staff member to land in the same spot as me at the right time if they're unable to do it.
that answers my question. Thanks, Sid.
Can you think of situations where things didn't go well or didn't go right, and you learned from, say, a difficult conversation that didn't go the way you wanted, or a situation
Oh, yeah.
after a decision, and how did it change your practice?
So it would have been, I was a VP at the time. This is one that sticks out. I'm in one now. I'll talk about that in a second. I would say one that sticks out to me, I was a brand new VP. I'd only been at the school the year prior to, but certainly it was a school, it was a middle school, 6, 7, 8, one of the only ones in the whole Northwest Territory. So we would call it a true middle school, but it wasn't functioning as a middle school and it had a really not such great reputation. So as I became a part of the new admin team, the principal came from another school, we really strategically looked at making some changes, right? Like we certainly got to take the ship and steer it in a different direction if we're going to turn a corner in a reasonable amount of time. So I think what we end up doing was we end up changing not just a few things, we literally end up changing almost everything. We're talking a new schedule, we're talking a different lunchtime, we're talking about running, daily phys ed, and we did a consistent schedule every day. We did a list of, I'd say, true middle school things, and we stole a lot of ideas from different middle schools across the country. And on paper, it sounded great. We had buy-in from the staff, but then all of a sudden, we had a lot of pushback from parents, a lot of pushback. And hindsight's 2020. When I look back now, absolutely, we should have got a lot of pushback. But these two, this young new VP guy and this a little bit experienced principal, brand new to the school, walked in. We moved classrooms, like we changed supervision. It was like, because we started making one change after another, we're like, oh my gosh, we're going down a rabbit hole and we couldn't go back. Where I think if I was the wind it all back, the ideas that we had, I'll be honest with you, they still have in the school today. I would say the philosophy of running it as a middle school, absolutely. All those things were rock solid. But we really needed to do a little more consultation with staff, a little more consultation with parents in particular, and really maybe even the school board, because they're going to support us or not. And we ran into some challenges because we realized when we made these changes, staff liked it for sure, but it created things that we didn't anticipate, extra supervision. It caused issues with, for whatever reason, lunchtime activities, like some of these funky things that you get caught in an idea. And because you're new, and really we didn't know the school all that well, you could get that tunnel vision. Where if I was to do it today and walked in their same circumstances, I probably would have done a lot more research, really focused on, say, 2 changes, and then maybe hit the gas pedal after a year, right? Like, though we did, to defend myself and the principal, we were a little under the gun to turn this place around because it was not so good, in the sense of a lot of bad reputation around town with teenagers and middle school kids and other extracurricular activities that are not acceptable and those kinds of things. So if I was to wind it back, that decision, I would certainly do it differently today. But again, you got to be okay with that. I'm a firm believer in whatever you do, like whether it's an event, if I have a staff member run an event, or even myself at the end of every school year, take time by yourself. You must reflect. Pros and cons. What went well, what did not? If I was to redo it, what would I do again? You know what? It's like when I try to empower staff, whether it's running the drama production Grease, or whether it's running a whole sports tournament that involves 1,000 kids for a soccer tournament, after it's all done, after the dust settles, you have to reflect, because if you were to run that tournament tomorrow, what would you do differently? I try to do that myself. As of right now, because as I mentioned earlier, we're transitioning from one curriculum to another, and there's super challenges with it because it's a year-by-year basis. So last year we introduced grade 9, because my school is grade 9 to 12. So we introduced grade 9 with the new curriculum. So this year it's grade 9 to 10. Then next year, grade 9, 10, 11, and then the following year is up to 12. So scheduling, as you can imagine, if you've made a high school schedule before with 660 kids in 2 different systems at the same time, takes me a long time. We made an adjustment to the periods of the day. I'm sure if any of you have been an administrator in BC, many high schools run 4 periods in a day. So that was just not going to work, because in order to get everything the kids required, in order to have the kids in both systems, in order for class sizes not to balloon on me, we made it 5 periods a day. So we've run 5 periods a day for 2 years now. So we went from 85-minute periods to 68, which everybody loves. 68 minutes in theory, great learning time, good, very practical, but it's also 5 periods a day. So it's more transitions, which sometimes can be concerning. For example, availability of washrooms in between the periods. Who was thinking about that when I made the schedule? But it's that I'm in that one now. And if you ask me this question in 2 years' time, I might put that on my list. But right now it's been tough because it's more transitions. Teachers are teaching the same number of kids, but more times in a day. That's challenging. It just creates those little funky things. Because on one hand, teachers feel, because they were so accustomed to teaching for 85 minutes, are they rushed in 68? I was thinking they were going to love it right off the bat, which they did. They do now and have adjusted, but it takes time. But will we keep that after the transition? I can't sit here and tell you. I don't know. It's going to be a learn as we go, but I also have to be okay with that. But I believe in also being honest with the staff. Hey guys, we're doing this change. And I did lots of research of talking to lots of schools in BC. I did lots of talk to how some of the smaller districts did this transition when they did the new curriculum about 10 years ago or so. And I picked and choose different things to try to work here. In BC, especially in the large areas, they do courses that are off schedule, and they're able to have access to online learning. We don't really have a lot of that. So our kids do need more face-to-face time in order to make those things happen. So we decided to do this. We'll have to do a podcast in about a year's time, and I'll give you an update.
Okay, it sounds like a good idea.
But even listening between the 2 stories,
Yeah.
your approach, even though this hasn't been easy, and you're already looking at some areas you'd like to, your approach was different than your first example, right? You did
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. I think right away, before I even pitched the 5 periods to the staff, our admin team did lots of research on it. We went even shadowed a few schools. We had some meetings online with them. We then brought in our department heads. So we have a leadership team of different people in different departments and sections of the school. So there's about 8 other people. We brought them in, banged it around. Like we even had different numbers. I think originally we were looking at 70-minute periods. Then we're like, okay, that's not going to work because of the requirements of the government and all those things. Yeah, I certainly did it differently, probably because of my experience back when I was brand new to administration.
Dean MacInnis' stories illustrate how important reflection is as a critical tool for principals focusing on learning from past decisions and improving future ones. Like Dean, principals have not been trained to deal with supporting the mental health needs of others at a school, yet, like Dean, principals hear many traumatic stories from students, from parents, and from staff. It's essential for principals to seek and set up support systems in order to maintain their own wellness. Find out more about our work with restorative questions for debriefing school situations that really do address some very practical how-tos for the many stories you encounter at your office door. Check out www.restorative.ca. And as you reflect, ask yourself some of these restorative questions. What happened? What was I thinking at the time? What do I think now? How did this impact me and others? And in what ways? And how can I learn from this for next time something similar arises? It's part of making things right, and it starts with you, the principal.